Today I will be discussing W.E.B. Du Bois, an educational journey through a black and white landscape. W.E.B. Du Bois was part of a group of leaders he called the Talented Tenth, who he believed could uplift the race through education and activism and challenge systemic racism causing the strife of African Americans. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was born on February 23, 1868, in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. His parents were Alfred Du Bois and Mary Sylvina Burghardt. He had a happy childhood despite the many social and political changes taking place during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. Du Bois argued that a well-rounded education that included the classics was critical in developing what he called the Talented Tenth, a small group of highly educated leaders who would then come forth and guide the masses to promote a more fair and just society for black people. W.E.B. Du Bois grew up in a predominantly white New England community where he did not experience much racism. Du Bois excelled in school with the support of his mother. In high school, he thrived and took classical classes in place of regular classes to prepare him for college at the suggestion of his principal and mentor, Frank Hosmer. He graduated with honors from Barrington High School in 1884. Du Bois had planned to attend Harvard University, but Du Bois' mother passed away, and without the means to pay for college, he canceled his plans. However, Frank Hosmer and other leaders in the community arranged a fund for Du Bois to attend college and decided he should go to Fisk University instead of Harvard. At Fisk University, he demonstrated his proficiency in philosophy, chemistry, U.S. history, and other subject matters. During his time there, Du Bois taught black children for 2 summers in an impoverished rural county, which influenced his thoughts on education and how he could help African Americans change their circumstances in life. While at Fisk University, Du Bois joined the university newspaper and joined cultural activities. He published a short novel, Tom Brown at Fisk, in which some of his thoughts about education and the role of black leaders emerged. After graduating Fisk University in 1888, Du Bois was accepted into Harvard University as a junior and was awarded a scholarship to pursue his degree. During his time at Harvard University, Du Bois studied under Professor William James and was influenced by his pragmatic philosophical views, which impacted his educational approaches. During this time, industrialization and technological advances resulted in much economic prosperity for the North, while the South was not advancing in part due to racial problems, which had led to an increase in violence against black people. In 1890, Du Bois earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy. He then enrolled in Harvard's graduate program and pursued a Master of Arts degree in history, graduating in 1891. He then decided to apply for Harvard's doctoral program in social science and was accepted. At the time, it was customary for students pursuing a career in higher education to study in Germany. In Germany, Du Bois attended Friedrich Wilhelm University, where he enrolled in the social science program and conducted research. There he studied with leading authorities in the fields of economics, Gustav Schmoller, political scientists Rudolf von Nies and Hendrik von Treitschke, and sociologist Max Weber. From Schmoller, he learned how, through the scientific method of study and analysis, social problems could be remedied. He also became acquainted with the ideology of Karl Marx, which influenced his thoughts on social and economic issues facing black people. Du Bois scholarship was not renewed, and he was unable to continue his studies to earn his doctorate in Germany, although he did return to Harvard University and was awarded his PhD in history in 1895. After Harvard, Du Bois taught Latin, Greek, and German in Wilberforce University. There he met Nina Gomer, an undergraduate student. In 1896, he married Nina and accepted an offer from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was asked to conduct a study on Philadelphia's black community. His research consisted of gathering historical and sociological information that looked at the family structure, educational system, local economy, and political participation of the citizens. Through his research, he concluded that many of the societal problems for African Americans stemmed from institutional racism, depriving African Americans of opportunities to advance economically and socially. In 1899, The Philadelphia Negro was published. In 1897, Du Bois accepted a position at Atlanta University to teach economics and history. As a professor of Atlanta University, he led the program that studied the social problems of African Americans, such as education, family, crime, and other related topics. During this time in the South, the Jim Crow laws were strictly imposed, and for Du Bois and his wife, the South's restrictions proved difficult to cope with, especially after the death of their son Burghardt, who died due to a lack of available facilities for the black community and who might have survived under an equal and fair social system. In 1900, Du Bois and Nina welcomed their daughter, Yolandi. At the Paris exhibition of 1900, Du Bois presented an exhibit on the American Negro, in which he laid out maps, charts, and books to highlight the many achievements of African Americans since their emancipation, and was awarded a gold medal. During the early 1900s, Du Bois wrote The Souls of Black Folk, The Talented Tenth, and John Brown, and started two magazines, The Moon and The Horizon. In 1906, he wrote The Litany of Atlanta after the race riots in Atlanta. His thoughts on education were becoming clearer as he opposed a well-known African American, Booker T. Washington, the director of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The Tuskegee Institute was a vocational school supported by wealthy white industrialists seeking highly skilled workers. The school programs included agriculture and manual training. Booker T. Washington did not believe higher education could help struggling black people. However, he did believe that training them in the skills needed, such as agriculture, domestic service, and manufacturing, would provide them with a livelihood. Du Bois did not fully disagree with the idea of vocational training, except he felt strongly that a well-rounded education should also include training in the liberal arts if black people were going to advance socially. Additionally, he argued that a liberal arts education was also the only way the talented tenth, as he called the highly gifted amongst his race, to be trained for college and come forth and lead African Americans in countering racism and injustice. Du Bois was critical of the educational institutions in the South that trained black children only to become manual laborers and servants, jobs that black people had always occupied and been associated with, and that would only continue the suppression of black people if not educated more broadly. Du Bois' thoughts on education were inspired by educator Alexander Crummell, who, like Du Bois, believed African Americans should be educated in the liberal arts as well as vocational training, and argued that the function of education was to prepare black leaders to elevate the race. Crummell founded the American Negro Academy in 1897, an organization that supported the advancement of African Americans, which Du Bois became a member of, along with others of similar thinking. Du Bois and other black leaders assembled and organized to form the Niagara movement to speak against the unfair Jim Crow laws and to promote quality education for black people. Du Bois became a member of another organization after the race riots in Atlanta and Springfield, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. Northern progressives, out of the concern that violence would expand to northern states, acted quickly and started the organization in hopes of bringing an end to the destruction and brutality occurring around the country. Du Bois became a co-founding member of the NAACP and editor of the organization's magazine, The Crisis. From 1909 to 1934, and again when he returned to the NAACP briefly in the 1940s, the magazine's purpose was to organize and direct civil rights movements. Through The Crisis, Du Bois educated the masses about African American issues in hopes of persuading activism in the community. He also educated the community in African culture to instill a sense of pride in their heritage. In 1915, Booker T. Washington passed away, and although Du Bois disagreed with many of Booker T. Washington's view on how to uplift the lives of black people, in later years he would reconcile on many positions, especially the idea of voluntary segregation as a financial strategy to improve the lives of African Americans. At this time, a conflict was taking place in Europe, and America's attempt to isolationism did not prevail. During the 1920s, a new leader and movement emerged, with Du Bois becoming a prominent voice for civil rights and the Harlem Renaissance celebrating black heritage and encouraging social change through the arts. This was a movement led by black leaders such as Allen Locke, Marcus Messiah Garvey, Du Bois, and other activists, bringing together black people from different countries such as Brazil and the Caribbean to promote the history and accomplishment of all Africans. The 1929 crash created an economic catastrophe in the black community. Du Bois at this time embraced the ideas of segregation. He once opposed Booker T. Washington. He now believed in the importance of being self-sufficient by creating a communal economic infrastructure. By the 1930s, Du Bois was determined that the black community needed to establish cooperatives. But to become successful, he believed a curriculum that emphasized economics, capitalism, and economic cooperation was essential, as was for black people to have a voice in their schools on the kind of curriculum that would best serve the interests of the community. Segregation of schools was a belief that Du Bois had opposed in the past, believing it was undemocratic. However, his thinking now was open to the idea of separate schools as long as they were equally funded, believing black children would benefit from an environment free of racism and that accurately taught African American history. Du Bois wrote about his changing views on the issue in an essay, Does the Negro Need Separate Schools?, which clearly stated his position on education and its connection to its other ideas about black cooperatives. Throughout his life, Du Bois maintained that educational curriculum should teach the basics of reading, writing, and mathematics, which he believed were essential in developing critical thinking skills needed to be a productive and successful member of society. His views also supported progressive ideas for education, such as as schools serving as multifunctional institutions that should teach children more than just subject matter, but also social issues relating to the community and society. Progressive education had two thoughts. One was child centered, emphasizing the child's interests. The other was social reconstructionist, which believed schools should have a role in social reform. In his later years, Du Bois expressed his inclination towards Marxism. He believed capitalism and education were interrelated to the development of social classes and also created racism and sexism. After resigning from the NAACP due to differences in political views, Du Bois had several clashes with the federal government over his Marxist ideology and admiration for the Soviet Union's social structure. During the 1950s, Senator McCarthy was an ambitious political figure who pursued those who he believed to have communist connections. The Justice Department indicted Du Bois and his associates for refusing to register as foreign agents under the Peace Information Center. Although Du Bois and his associates were later acquitted by the Supreme Court, his popularity declined in the U.S. It was also during this time that, in the summer of 1950, that Du Bois' wife, Nina, passed away. He later would marry Shirley Graham, who worked with him at the Peace Information Center. Du Bois and his wife, Shirley, left the United States in 1961, moving to Ghana. He later became a citizen of Ghana in 1963. There he began his research on a project to publish the first African encyclopedia, which he unfortunately was unable to complete. Du Bois died on August 27, 1963. Du Bois was an educator, journalist, writer, activist for civil rights. He spent much of his life as an educator who advocated for black education as a path to equality and freedom. Through his many writings, he expressed his ideas about racism in America, how African Americans lived a double consciousness to survive in a white-dominated society, and only through education could institutional racism be dismantled, which prevented African Americans from improving their condition in life. He wrote about the talented tenth, as he referred to the educated amongst his race, that would lift the masses through their leadership. Du Bois, in his publication of The Crisis, highlighted African American achievements and historical work. Du Bois' social study on the Philadelphia Negro, while at the University of Pennsylvania, was the first of its kind that delved into the lives of impoverished and oppressed African Americans. Du Bois led by example. He became the first African American to receive a doctorate from Harvard University, one of the first to study the sociology of African Americans, and one of the most dedicated black leaders to civil rights and education in American history. He believed through education, not only could the oppressed be freed, but also the oppressor could be liberated from his misguided hatred, and the color line vanished. Thank you.